The lecture hall was silent except for the professor's calm and confident voice. His steps echoed as he walked across the stage, hands folded behind his back, eyes full of certainty. "Civilizations do not fall so easily," he declared. "Extinction is rare. History proves it. Intelligent species find ways to adapt, to survive. Always." The cadets sat straight in their chairs, rows of young men and women in fresh uniforms. Some wrote down his words, others simply stared, their minds half lost in daydreams. For them, the professor's lecture was only another long hour to endure. But one cadet at the back of the room listened differently. His eyes were not sleepy or careless. They carried a shadow, as though he had seen something the others could not imagine. He leaned forward slightly, his fists clenched tight against the desk. The professor raised his voice, his pride strong. "Remember this when you serve. Humanity is strong. Humanity is unbreakable. Extinction, it is not our destiny." A few cadets clapped softly, nodding with pride. Then came the voice that cut the air like a blade. "Professor," it was not loud. It was not angry. It was soft, almost a whisper. But every cadet in the hall heard it. The professor turned, eyebrows raised. "Yes, cadet?" The young man stood up. His uniform was clean, his face pale, his eyes sharp with something heavy, something close to fear. "You are wrong," the cadet said quietly. The room froze. Cadets looked at one another, surprised. A few smirked, waiting for a quick punishment. "Wrong?" The professor narrowed his eyes. "Explain yourself." The cadet took a slow breath. His voice was steady, but it carried weight. "You say extinction is rare. But our kind? Our kind is already almost extinct." A ripple of laughter spread through the hall. Some cadets shook their heads, whispering jokes under their breath. But the cadet did not sit down. His eyes stayed locked on the professor, burning with an urgency that killed every laugh in the room. 99% of us are gone," he whispered again. The words sucked the air out of the hall. The laughter died. Silence fell heavier than before. The professor's frown deepened. "That is nonsense. Humanity has dozens of colonies, thriving fleets, growing cities. We have—" "Fleets vanish," the cadet interrupted. "Colonies go dark. Families disappear. I have seen it, Professor. Empty homes, silent worlds, entire populations erased." His hands shook slightly, but his voice stayed firm. "You call that survival?" Murmurs spread among the cadets. Some looked scared now. Others looked angry at his boldness. But none could laugh anymore. The professor straightened his shoulders. His voice was sharper now, cutting back with authority. "Cadet, your words are dangerous. Humanity is strong. We have survived wars, disasters, and invasions. Not this time," the cadet said firmly. The room grew colder. Even the professor felt something tighten in his chest. The boy's voice was not dramatic. It was not meant to scare. It was simply the truth spoken with raw certainty. For the first time, the professor could not find his next words. Then the doors of the hall burst open. A young officer ran inside, his face pale, sweat on his brow. He held a datapad, his hand shaking. "Professor," the officer gasped. "We've received a signal. Colony Alpha 7. It's gone. Every life lost." A wave of shock swept through the room. Cadets whispered in fear, their voices trembling. Some covered their mouths, others gripped the edges of their desks. The cadet who had spoken closed his eyes, as if the weight of his words had finally landed on everyone else. The professor froze, his proud stance broken. His voice caught in his throat, but no words came. Then the academy alarms began to blare. Sirens wailed through the building, red warning lights flashing against the walls. A mechanical voice repeated over the loudspeakers. "Alert. Incoming transmission. All personnel to stations. They are coming." The sound filled every corner of the hall. The professor's face turned pale. His heart pounded. He looked again at the cadet who stood still, calm in the storm of fear. And in that moment, the professor understood something terrible. The boy had not been exaggerating. The first warning had already begun. The alarms faded slowly, but the echoes of fear remained inside the lecture hall. The cadets whispered nervously while the professor stood frozen, staring at the officer who had brought the message. "Every life lost?" the professor finally asked. His voice, once strong and commanding, now cracked. The officer nodded. "No survivors. The colony's final signal lasted only seconds, then silence. The word spread through the cadets like poison. Silence. No survivors. A thriving human colony erased as if it had never existed. The cadet who had spoken earlier lowered his eyes. He had expected this. It was not news to him, it was confirmation. The professor forced himself to breathe. His mind searched for answers, for reason, for something that could explain it. An accident? A disaster? Perhaps a solar flare, or... The cadet's voice cut him again, steady and cold. No accident, no storm. This is the pattern. One colony falls, then another. Until nothing is left, the hall grew colder. Some cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others simply stared at the floor, too frightened to meet anyone's eyes. The professor clenched his fists. You speak as if you know, but how? Where does your certainty come from? The cadet raised his head. His gaze was calm, unblinking. Because I was there, Professor. I saw the last moments of Beta 4. A ripple of shock ran through the hall. The cadets gasped. Even the officer's eyes widened. You? The professor's voice trembled. You were on Beta 4? That colony was destroyed months ago. The cadet nodded slowly. His voice was low, but it carried to every corner of the room. I was a child then. My family lived there. We woke to the sound of sirens. Ships fell from the sky. The ground shook. Lights burned the horizon. And then silence. Everyone gone. Everyone except me. His words fell heavy, cutting deeper than the alarms ever could. The professor's chest tightened. He had studied wars, disasters, losses. But this was different. This was personal. Real. The cadet continued, his tone sharp but not loud. They take us one by one. They erase us without warning. It is not survival anymore, Professor. It is collapse. The professor opened his mouth, but before he could speak, the Academy's main screen lit up at the front of the hall. A transmission flickered into view. Static, distorted images. A colony street, empty and broken. Houses stood like shells, doors wide open, no sign of life. Shadows moved across the ruins, but they were not human. The screen cut out, a metallic voice followed, the last recording from Alpha 7. We can't stop them, they are already here. Run. Run. Then silence. The room shook as if the building itself carried their fear. Cadets panicked, whispering fast, their young faces pale with terror. The officer shouted for order, but the fear was too strong. The professor raised his hand sharply. Quiet. His voice cracked, but it silenced the room. He turned to the cadet. What do you know? Who are they? What did you see on Beta 4? The cadet's jaw tightened. For a moment he said nothing. Then his eyes lifted, steady and cold. Not who, he said. What? The silence that followed was heavier than before. The cadet stepped forward, his voice low but clear. They are not like us. They do not conquer. They do not rule. They erase. Entire cities vanish. Not even bodies remain. Only silence. That is why we are almost extinct. The professor's throat went dry. He looked around at the frightened cadets, his students, his future protectors. They were young, untested, still believing in human strength. But the truth was burning away their pride. Then, the professor whispered, if this is true, why warn us now? Why not sooner? The cadets' eyes narrowed. Because now they are closer. And soon they will not be at our colonies, he paused. The weight of his words sank deep. They will be here. The hall fell into silence again, deeper than before. No one laughed. No one whispered. Even the alarms seemed distant. The professor felt the ground shift beneath his certainty. Extinction had always been theory, a distant fear, something for history books. But now it stood at the door. The cadet looked straight at him. The first warning has been given. Ignore it, and humanity will not bend this time, Professor. It will break. Outside the academy, the skies rumbled. Ships prepared for launch. Signals screamed across the comms. Something was coming fast. The professor's heart pounded. For the first time in his life, he felt the taste of true fear, and he finally understood. The cadet was not a boy crying out of fear. He was the messenger of a truth humanity had refused to see. The academy felt different after the warning. Sirens still echoed outside, but inside the lecture hall, silence ruled. Every cadet sat frozen, their young faces pale. The professor stood at the front, no longer confident, no longer proud. His eyes stayed locked on the cadet who had spoken. That cadet, the quiet one at the back, now walked forward. His steps were steady, unhurried. It was as if the chaos outside had no power over him. He stopped near the podium and looked directly at the professor. "You want answers," he said softly. "But answers are not easy. They are heavy. They will break the old beliefs you hold so tightly." The professor's jaw clenched. "If what you claim is true, Cadet, then we need those answers. Humanity needs them." The cadet's gaze shifted to the others. Dozens of eyes watched him, wide with fear. Some cadets leaned forward, desperate to know. Others leaned back as if distance might protect them from the truth. The cadet nodded once. His voice was calm, but each word carried the weight of memory. "I was there, Professor. I survived Beta 4, but not by chance. I was taken." Gasps spread through the hall. "Taken?" the professor asked. The cadet's eyes darkened. "Yes, they came in silence. No fleets in the sky, no armies on the ground. Only light. It swept across the city and people vanished. One moment they were alive, the next gone. No screams, no bodies, just nothing." The cadets shifted in their seats, horror flashing across their faces. The cadet continued, his voice steady. "I do not know why they spared me. Maybe I was too young. Maybe I was useless to them. But they kept me. I saw their ships. I saw their cold worlds. I learned their silence. They do not speak. They do not bargain. They erase." The professor's throat tightened. "Then how did you return?" The cadet lowered his head for a moment, remembering. His hands trembled slightly, but he forced them still. "One night when their ship passed near a broken colony, I escaped. I do not know if they let me or if they did not care. But I ran, I hid. Eventually a human scout ship found me. I was alive, but I was not the same. I had seen too much." The hall grew heavier with every word. "They are not conquerors," the cadet whispered. "They are not predators. They are something else. To them we are noise. They want silence. A galaxy where only they remain. And so they erase us." The professor swallowed hard. His hands, once steady, now trembled. He looked at the young faces around him, faces filled with fear and disbelief. "You expect us to believe," the professor said, "that an entire species wages war not for power, not for territory, but for silence?" The cadet's eyes burned with certainty. "I do not expect you to believe, Professor. I expect you to prepare. Because whether you believe or not, they are already here." A loud tremor shook the hall. Dust fell from the ceiling. Cadets cried out in fear. The alarms outside screamed louder. The officer who had entered earlier rushed back in. His voice was frantic. "Contact confirmed. Unknown ships entering orbit. No identification. No response to hails. They're nothing like we've seen before." The cadets panicked, some standing, others clutching their desks. The professor turned sharply to the cadet. "If what you say is true, then tell us how to fight them." The cadet's expression hardened. His voice was colder now, almost like steel. "You cannot fight what you do not understand. Humanity believes in weapons, fleets, armies. But against them, none of that matters. They are not here for battle. They are here to erase." The professor's chest felt heavy, his mind racing. He was a man of logic, of knowledge, but this truth broke every rule he had believed. He stared at the cadet, seeing not a frightened boy, but something else. "You," the professor whispered. "You're not just a cadet, are you?" The room fell silent. Every cadet turned to look at the boy standing in front of them. The cadet lifted his head. His eyes gleamed with something both human and something more. "I am a messenger," he said quietly. "Not by choice. By survival. I carry their truth because no one else escaped to tell it. And now I carry humanity's last chance to hear the warning before the silence comes for all of us." The professor's heart pounded. His mind screamed with denial, but his soul whispered the truth. He believed him. Another tremor shook the academy, stronger this time. The lights flickered. The cadets clung to their seats. The officer shouted again. "They're landing!" Unknown craft descending toward the colony. The cadet turned slowly toward the window, his face calm. "It begins," he said. The professor followed his gaze. Out beyond the horizon, faint lights glowed in the dark sky. Not stars. Not human ships. Something else. And for the first time, the professor understood the depth of the boy's words. This was not theory. Not debate. This was the messenger's truth. The academy shook again. This time it was no tremor from the alarms, it was the ground itself. Dust fell from the ceiling, lights flickered, and every cadet felt the vibration in their bones. The professor gripped the podium to steady himself. His eyes darted toward the large window at the side of the hall. Outside, the night sky was no longer empty. Strange lights glowed, moving in ways no human ship ever could. The officer shouted over the chaos. "Unknown craft entering atmosphere." "They're descending fast." Panic spread through the cadets. Some stood ready to run while others froze in their seats. Fear clamped down on the hall like a heavy hand. The professor turned toward the cadet, the boy who had spoken the truth. "What are they?" he demanded. "What are we facing?" The cadet's face was calm, too calm for his age. His eyes fixed on the window. "You will see soon enough. But remember, Professor, they do not come to fight. They come to erase." The word echoed in the professor's mind, erase. Suddenly, the Academy's sirens blared louder than ever. A mechanical voice repeated, "Warning. Unknown landing craft detected. All personnel to defense stations. Prepare for contact." The professor's throat was dry. Defense stations? Against something they didn't even understand? Outside, the first ship touched down. It did not land like human vessels with fire and smoke. It slid silently from the sky, lowering without sound, as if gravity itself obeyed it. Its surface shifted like liquid metal, reflecting light but showing no clear shape. Gasps filled the hall as more ships followed, descending in perfect silence. No engines, no flames, only cold silver shapes blotting out the stars. "What? What are those things?" whispered one cadet, his voice trembling. The professor could not answer. His knowledge, his books, his theories, all useless now. He had no name for what he saw. The ships opened, not with doors, not with ramps. Their surfaces simply folded apart, peeling back like skin. Something stepped out. The cadets pressed closer to the windows, fear locking them in place. The creatures were tall, thin, their forms shifting like smoke wrapped in glass. They had no faces, no eyes, yet every cadet who looked at them felt seen. Their movements were smooth, unnatural, as if the ground itself carried them forward. One cadet gasped. "They don't even make a sound." The professor's heart pounded. He had studied hundreds of alien species, but nothing like this. These were not conquerors. They carried no weapons, no armor, no banners. Yet their very presence made the air heavy, crushing. The officer's voice cracked. "They're heading toward the colony center. Straight toward us." The professor turned back to the cadet, his fear breaking into desperation. "You survived them once. Tell me, what do we do?" The cadet's eyes stayed locked on the advancing figures. His voice was low, heavy with memory. "Run, hide, pray, but do not try to speak with them. They will not answer. They only erase." The word sent a chill through the room. Suddenly, the Academy comm system crackled to life. A desperate voice shouted through the speakers. "This is Tower Command. Unknown entities approaching the perimeter. All units." The voice cut off in static. The silence that followed was worse than the alarms. Every cadet looked at the professor. For the first time, the man who always had answers had none. His mouth opened, but no orders came. His mind was blank, frozen between terror and disbelief. The cadet stepped forward, his voice steady. "Professor, this is no longer a lesson. It is survival. If you want these cadets to live, you must act now." The professor stared at him, the weight of responsibility crushing down. For years, he had taught that humanity was strong, unbreakable. But now he was faced with a truth that shattered those beliefs. The ground outside shook again. The faceless figures were closer now, their glass-like bodies shimmering in the pale light. The professor forced air into his lungs. "Evacuate the cadets," he said hoarsely to the officer. "Get them to the lower tunnels now." The officer saluted quickly and began shouting orders. Cadets stumbled to their feet, some crying, some silent, all terrified. As they filed out, the professor looked back at the cadet. "And you? What will you do?" The cadet's eyes glimmered with something unreadable. "I will stay. They may come for me first. If so, it might buy you time." The professor's chest tightened. For a moment, he saw not a cadet, but something greater. A survivor, a messenger, maybe even a shield. The faceless beings were at the colony gates now. The Academy lights flickered. The sirens died, and in that eerie silence, the first encounter began. The tunnels beneath the Academy were filled with chaos. Cadets ran in tight groups, boots striking the metal floor, their voices trembling as they whispered prayers or shouted names of missing friends. The officer tried to keep order. his commands echoing down the narrow passageways, but fear spread faster than discipline. Above them, the ground rumbled again. The sound was not of weapons or explosions, it was heavier, deeper. The kind of sound that made bones ache and hearts race. The professor stayed behind near the main hall, his eyes locked on the great window. The faceless beings had reached the academy gates. They did not break them down. They did not fire a weapon. The gates simply opened, bending inward as if reality itself obeyed their will. The professor whispered to himself, "How do you fight something that doesn't even try to fight?" Beside him, the cadet stood still, his posture calm, his gaze fixed on the figures gliding forward. "They are not here for battle," the cadet said quietly. "They are here to finish the silence." The professor turned sharply. "Then tell me, why keep us alive at all? Why let any of us see this?" The cadet's jaw tightened. "Because warnings must be witnessed. Fear spreads faster when someone survives to tell the story. And fear is part of their design." Before the professor could respond, the lights in the hall flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the room, broken only by the pale glow of the alien forms outside. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through walls and skin alike. The cadets in the tunnel screamed as the sound cut into their ears. Some collapsed, clutching their heads. The professor staggered, gripping the edge of a desk. His mind blurred. It felt like the hum was inside his skull, erasing his thoughts one by one. The cadet did not fall. He stood straight, eyes narrowed, as if the sound was familiar to him. "This is how they begin," he said. "They erase memory before they erase flesh." The professor fought to speak. His voice cracked. Why are you not affected?" The cadet's eyes gleamed faintly in the darkness. "Because I have already endured it. Once you have been touched by the silence, it cannot take you the same way twice." The professor stared at him, the truth dawning like a slow horror. The boy was not only a survivor, he was marked. The hall doors groaned as the first of the faceless figures drifted inside. Their bodies shimmered like broken glass under water. No footsteps, no sound. Only the crushing weight of their presence. Cadets in the tunnels cried out as the hum grew stronger. Lights flickered violently, sparking from the ceiling. The officer pushed the cadets deeper into the tunnels. "Move, faster. Don't look back." But even as he shouted, the metal walls around them began to bend. Not broken, not destroyed. Bent as if the very structure of the academy was being rewritten. The professor turned to the cadet in desperation. "Tell me there is a way. Tell me humanity has a chance." The cadet's face was grim, his voice heavy. "A chance, perhaps. But not here. Not today. The academy will fall, Professor. This place is already lost." The professor's heart broke at the words. He thought of the cadets, so young, so full of promise. They were supposed to be the guardians of humanity's future. Now they were only prey trapped in a cage. The faceless beings glided deeper into the hall. One of them turned, or perhaps it only seemed to turn, toward the professor. Though it had no face, he felt its gaze pierce straight through him. His knees weakened. The cadet stepped in front of him, blocking the being's path. His voice rose, steady and defiant. "If you want silence, you'll take me first." The air grew colder. The hum deepened. The alien form hovered closer. For a moment, the professor thought the cadet would vanish like the people of Beta 4, erased in an instant. But the alien paused. It did not touch him. Instead, its glass-like surface rippled as if recognizing him. The cadet whispered without turning his head. "Professor, take whoever you can, run. The tunnels may not save you, but distance might." The professor's heart pounded. "And you?" The cadet's lips curved into something between sorrow and resolve. "I am already theirs. Maybe that is why they wait. Maybe that is why I was left alive." The professor's throat tightened. He wanted to argue, to refuse, to drag the boy with him. But another tremor shook the hall, stronger this time. The walls cracked. The academy groaned like a dying beast. The officer's voice echoed faintly from below. "Professor, hurry." The professor met the cadet's eyes one last time. In them he saw no fear, only acceptance. With a heavy heart, the professor turned and ran toward the tunnels. Behind him, the hum grew louder, and the faceless beings closed in around the cadet. The last thing the professor heard before the tunnel doors sealed shut was the cadet's voice, steady and calm, carrying through the darkness. "Remember this warning. Humanity will not bend forever. But today we fall." The doors slammed shut. and the academy above was swallowed by silence. The tunnels groaned as if the earth itself was alive. Dust rained from the ceiling with every distant tremor. The professor led the surviving cadets through the darkness, his hands shaking as he clutched a dim lantern. Behind him, the officer forced the group forward, shouting, "Keep moving! Don't stop!" The young cadets tried to stay silent, but fear made their voices slip out in broken whispers. Some prayed, some cried softly, and others walked with empty eyes, their minds already broken by what they had seen. The professor's heart burned with guilt. He kept seeing the cadet's face, the boy who had stood between him and the faceless beings. His last words still echoed in the professor's mind. "Remember this warning." They reached a fork in the tunnels. The officer studied the old map in his hand, his jaw tight. Left leads to the supply bay, right leads to the outer ridge. If we go left, we may find food and weapons. If we go right, we may find open air. The professor did not hesitate. "Right. Supplies won't matter if the academy is already lost." The officer nodded and turned the group toward the ridge. The cadets stumbled after him, their boots scraping against the stone. As they moved, a sound followed them, low, steady, and unnatural. Not footsteps, not machinery. A vibration, as if the very walls were humming with the same alien power that had destroyed the academy above. One of the cadets clutched her ears. "It's them. They're inside the tunnels." The professor grabbed her hand firmly. "Don't listen to the sound. Focus on my voice. Keep walking." Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, a faint draft touched their faces. Air, cold and sharp, carrying the smell of ash. Hope surged in the group, and they hurried toward the light ahead. When they emerged from the tunnel, the sight before them froze them all. The academy was gone. Where once stood proud towers and walls, there was only emptiness, a crater of twisted stone and metal. The ground itself had been rewritten, melted into smooth, glass-like surfaces that reflected the pale moonlight. The sky above burned red with strange patterns, shapes that did not belong to nature. One cadet fell to his knees, sobbing. "It's all gone. Everything." The professor could not speak. His chest felt hollow. He turned slowly, scanning the horizon, and saw movement. The faceless beings floated above the ruins, their forms shimmering, untouchable. They did not chase, did not strike. They only watched. The officer gritted his teeth. "They're letting us go." The professor's voice cracked. "Not mercy. This is their message. They want us to carry the story." One cadet, a boy no older than 16, whispered, "Why us? Why not silence us too?" The professor closed his eyes. He saw again the cadet who had stayed behind, standing tall against the impossible. His voice was heavy when he answered. "Because someone warned them to let us live. Someone gave us this chance." The group stood in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on them. The officer snapped out of it first. "We cannot stay here. The ruins are cursed. We head to the mountains. If we keep moving, we might find a signal tower. We can call for rescue." The cadets obeyed, though their steps were slow, weak. Each one kept glancing back at the crater, as if afraid the silence itself would follow. The professor lingered at the ridge. He looked one last time at the place that had been their home, their academy. His throat tightened. "Your sacrifice won't be forgotten," he whispered to the memory of the cadet. Then he turned and followed the others into the night. Behind them, the ruins of the academy glowed faintly, as if the earth itself had been scarred by a wound that would never heal. The hum faded, but the silence remained. The survivors marched into the night. The mountain ridge was dark, its sharp peaks rising like black teeth against the red-stained sky. The professor carried the lantern, though its light was weak. Every shadow looked alive. Every gust of wind sounded like a whisper. The officer walked ahead, his hand always on the grip of his rifle, though deep inside he knew a rifle would be useless against what they had seen. The cadets followed behind him in silence, their young faces pale and hollow. The professor slowed his steps to walk beside them. He spoke softly, trying to distract them from fear. "Keep your eyes on the ground. One step at a time. Do not look back," but they did look back. All of them. The ruins of the academy glowed faintly in the distance, like a dying fire on the horizon. The glassy crater shimmered in the moonlight, unnatural, wrong. It was not just destruction, it was rewriting. Hours passed. The land around them grew worse. What once had been forest was now a wasteland of twisted shapes. Trees had melted into pillars of stone. Their branches fused into jagged claws reaching for the sky. Rivers no longer flowed with water. They were streams of ash and silver dust. One cadet whispered, "It feels like the world itself is broken." The professor placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, the world is not broken. It is only scarred." Scars mean survival. But even as he spoke, his heart doubted the words. The officer suddenly raised a fist. Stop, everyone froze. Ahead, on the open plain, strange figures moved slowly between the rocks. At first they thought it was more of the faceless beings, but then the light revealed something worse. These were humans. Or what used to be humans. Their bodies were twisted, their faces blurred as if someone had erased the details with rough hands. They wandered without purpose, dragging their feet, making no sound. When they turned, their eyes were blank, pure white. One cadet gasped too loud. The twisted figures stopped and lifted their heads in unison. For a long moment they stared. Then slowly they began to walk toward the group. "Back," the officer ordered. He raised his rifle and fired into the air. The sound cracked through the silence, echoing across the plain. The twisted humans did not run, did not scream. They only kept walking step by step, unhurried but unstoppable. The professor felt cold terror. "Don't waste bullets," he said quickly. "They're not attacking, they're drawn to us." "Then what are they?" one cadet asked, her voice trembling. The professor shook his head. "Witnesses. Survivors of the silence, but not truly alive anymore." The officer didn't argue. He motioned to the ridge. "We move around them. Stay quiet. Stay low." The survivors slipped into the rocks, their breaths held tight. The twisted figures wandered past, their blank eyes never blinking. The professor could feel their emptiness pressing into his soul. Finally, the group reached the far side of the plain. They climbed the rocky slope until their legs burned. By dawn, they collapsed beneath a cluster of jagged stones. The officer kept watch while the others rested. The cadets huddled together, too exhausted to speak. Some drifted into uneasy sleep, whispering in their dreams. The professor sat apart, staring at the rising sun. The sky was still red, painted with strange patterns that pulsed faintly, as if the world itself had become infected. He remembered the cadet's last words again. "Humanity will not bend forever. But today we fall." The professor's chest tightened. "How many times can we fall before we never rise again?" He whispered to himself. The officer moved closer. His face was stern, but his voice was low. "Professor, we have maybe 2 days of water left, no food. If we don't find shelter or a signal tower, these cadets won't last." The professor nodded. "Then we keep walking. As far as we must. The mountains hide old relay stations. Perhaps one still works." The officer's eyes narrowed. "And if it doesn't?" The professor looked at the sleeping cadets, their faces thin and frightened. He swallowed hard. "Then we send our warning another way. Humanity must know what has come." Above them, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint, unnatural hum. Both men froze. It was distant but familiar, the sound of the silence. The professor stood slowly. He did not wake the cadets. He only stared at the horizon, where the sun touched the broken land. The silence was spreading, and the wasteland was only the beginning. The mountains rose higher as the survivors climbed. Their bodies were weak, their steps heavy, but the thought of reaching a signal tower kept them moving. The officer led from the front, his eyes scanning every ridge. The professor walked beside the cadets, encouraging them whenever their legs gave up. The wasteland stretched behind them like a scar across the earth. Nothing moved there now, not even wind. The silence was following, always near, though unseen. By midday, the group reached a plateau. From there, the professor saw it at last, an old relay tower standing crooked against the sky. Its metal frame was rusted, one side bent as if crushed by a giant hand. But it still stood, reaching upward like a dying tree. "There," the professor whispered. "If it works, we can call for help." The cadets looked up with wide eyes, hope flickering in them for the first time since the academy fell. The officer nodded. "Move quickly. We don't know how long the silence will give us." The climb was rough. Loose rocks slid under their boots, and more than once a cadet nearly fell. But after an hour, they reached the base of the tower. Up close, the professor saw the scars more clearly. The tower was not only rusted, it was burned. Strange marks ran across the metal, glowing faintly like symbols written in fire. The professor touched one with trembling fingers, and his skin tingled. "Don't touch it," the officer warned sharply. The professor pulled his hand back. These are not burns. They are signatures. The silence leaves marks on everything it touches. The officer didn't reply. He began checking the base panel, forcing it open with his knife. Inside, wires hung loose, corroded with age. But a faint hum came from the core. It still has power, the officer said, surprised. The cadets gathered around as the professor knelt beside him. Together, they adjusted wires and pressed old switches. The panel sparked once, twice, and then the tower came alive. A red light blinked slowly at the top. One cadet gasped. "It works?" The professor gave a tired smile. "Not yet. But it's awake. We only need to send a signal." The officer handed him the microphone. "You're the one who speaks. Do it." The professor held the mic with shaking hands. He pressed the button, his voice rough but steady. "This is Professor Halden of the Galactic Academy. Our station has fallen. Our cadets are in danger. The silence has come. I repeat, the silence has come. If anyone hears this, respond." Static filled the air. The cadets waited, holding their breath. Nothing. The professor tried again, louder. "This is Professor Halden. The Academy is gone. The enemy is here." Suddenly the static shifted. A voice broke through, faint, distant. "Halden, survivors. Hold, do not." The signal crackled, then cut. The professor's heart raced. "There's someone out there. Someone heard us." But before hope could rise, the red light on the tower flickered and turned black. The hum faded. The machine died. The officer slammed the panel shut. "It's not enough. The tower is too damaged." The cadets looked at each other with wide, frightened eyes. One whispered, "But we heard them." "Someone knows." The professor nodded, though his heart was heavy. "Yes, someone knows. And that means we must keep moving. We cannot wait here." As they turned to leave, the youngest cadet froze. His eyes were wide, staring beyond the ridge. "They're here." Everyone followed his gaze. On the horizon, across the wasteland, dozens of faceless figures floated in the air. They did not hurry. They did not need to. They only moved forward slowly, like a tide that could not be stopped. The officer gripped his rifle. "We run." The group stumbled down the slope, their legs aching, their lungs burning. The professor looked back once more. The faceless beings had not sped up, but already the distance between them was smaller. As the survivors reached the next valley, the professor realized the truth. The signal had not only carried their voice outward, it had drawn the silence closer. He whispered to himself, dread filling his chest. "They wanted us to speak. They wanted us to call." The officer glanced at him. "What did you say?" The professor shook his head. "Nothing. Keep running." But deep inside he knew. The message had gone out. Humanity had been warned, and now the silence knew exactly where they were.